It's become a really unfortunate trend for the Irish this season. Another week, another key starter down for the rest of the season with an injury, and this time it's star cornerback Benjamin Morrison. So how does Notre Dame recover from this? That's next on Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018, and now I'm a producer at Fox Sports. And thank you for joining me here on Tuesday, October 15th. And thanks, as always, for making this your first listen of the day. As always, you can watch a show on YouTube where you can listen wherever it is that you get your podcast. Just remember to please like the video below and subscribe to the channel if you are watching along on YouTube. Or if you're listening to the podcast, please take a quick second, rate the show 5 stars, leave a review, and subscribe on your preferred platform. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Okay, it's Tuesday, which means Luke Smith is going to be on the show with me in a second here. But instead of diving right into the 3 things that we liked and didn't like from the Stanford game, we have to address the big news, and that is Notre Dame is going to be without their star cornerback, Benjamin Morrison, for the remainder of this season. It came as a big surprise to a lot of us. Apparently, he suffered a hip injury that's going to require surgery, and that surgery is going to keep him out for the remainder of the season. It's a big blow. It's another big blow for this Notre Dame defense. They've dealt with a lot so far this year, and now Al Golden is going to have to figure out a way to make up for the loss of one of their best players on the entire roster. So Luke and I are going to cover all that, plus our final thoughts on Stanford. Enjoy. All right, Luke Smith is back with me here, and we will get to our final thoughts about the Notre Dame win over Stanford, things we liked and didn't like, but we have to start with the biggest news of the day, and arguably maybe the biggest news story of the season so far as it pertains to an off-the-field story. Notre Dame is going to be without their star cornerback, Benjamin Morrison, for the rest of the season. Marcus Freeman announced in his press conference on Monday that Morrison injured his hip, and it is going to require surgery, and now in a season where Notre Dame has already been decimated on their defense, they suffer an injury to arguably the best player on the entire team. You and I had kind of heard maybe this was a possibility as early as Sunday night, but we weren't sure. Now that it's official, what's your reaction?
Well, my initial reaction was, I hope that's wrong. And now that it's not wrong and official, it's really, really unfortunate just because it's sort of an abrupt injury where there was no clear cause of whatever happened, and you don't realize that as he's out there on Saturday, that's the last time in all likelihood you're going to see him in a Notre Dame uniform, although there are some people out there that seem to think he might come back. I don't really understand that at all, but that seems to be a refrain out there. In any event, it's a total bummer for him and for Notre Dame fans who just really want to watch Benjamin Morrison play, and a guy that has been a star since he stepped onto the field at Ohio State in 2022. And while I don't necessarily think, and this sounds crazy, that it really impacts Notre Dame down the stretch run of this regular season, just based on who they're playing and how good the rest of the secondary is, it could potentially cause some problems in the postseason should Notre Dame not trip up prior to that point. So it's a bummer, and selfishly, it's a bummer just because he's a lot of fun to watch play.
Yeah, we'll get to what this means for the rest of the season. Does it change Notre Dame's ceiling, all that stuff? But I really want to focus on Morrison here because it really did catch us by surprise. Now, he did suffer some kind of an injury against Louisville. He missed a few snaps, went to the locker room, came back in that game, but then he played with the starters for the first 3 quarters of that game against Stanford. I went back and looked. He left at the same time as all the other starters did on defense. He was warming up before the 4th quarter. So it really is odd how he went from, dealing with some sort of an injury against Louisville, playing for not the full game because he didn't play the 4th quarter, but he played the full game with the starters. And then 24 hours later, we find out that he is going to have surgery and miss the rest of the season. Now, I've seen a lot of people speculate as to what happened there. I will say the fact that it's a hip injury leads me to believe that this has probably been something that he's been playing through for a while because hip injuries are kind of nagging, but I think it just got to the point where he had to address it somehow. Maybe the pain became too much. He couldn't tolerate it anymore, and it was just a matter of when do you get the surgery? It was inevitable, and a question of whether or not he could play through it. And, he made the decision or the trainers made the decision. We don't really know. And this is where I would say the Notre Dame policy about injuries actually hurts them, because now a bunch of people are going to speculate about what happened, why Benjamin Morrison decided to have the surgery now. Like, they could cover all their bases here if people were allowed to ask Marcus Freeman about the timeline and what exactly went down, because I think it would actually protect Benjamin Morrison, because now some people are like, oh, he's quitting on the team. He's doing this so that he can go to the NFL. He doesn't want to play through an injury. Like, I don't believe that's the case, but when Notre Dame is just going to be very vague and cryptic about this injury, that's not going to stop any of the speculation. I think it actually hurts Morrison and hurts them as a team.
It's a dumb policy. I've said that on here multiple times. I really don't understand it at all. And you're right. It absolutely does harm them in this situation. I think your intuition that this is something that's been nagging and maybe you just reached a breaking point is probably accurate. Something just kind of seemed off in that Louisville game. And I thought we had initially heard it was a groin thing, but I guess the groin and the hip aren't that far apart. So maybe they're all intertwined, linked. It's just really unfortunate. And I'm sure I can't wait to see what's out there. I mean, I already saw somebody say, what if he got hurt when he was warming up for that fourth quarter after the weather delay? That would just be terrible. I don't think that's what happened. But it sucks. And regardless of what happened, I think everybody's just going to look for somebody or something to castigate, because that's their only way to go about life, is just finding people to blame. That's not really what I want to do about this. I just want to state that it's extremely unfortunate. And this is somebody that you said might be the best Notre Dame defensive back ever. And now we're not going to see him again, probably. And that just sucks.
The similarities between Morrison and Kyle Hamilton and their career arcs it's weird. Like, they both came on as true freshmen. Now, Kyle Hamilton had a little bit more hype because he was the 5-star. Morrison was like low 4-star, but they both started as true freshmen, broke out that year, were freshman All-Americans. They were elite as sophomores. And then going into their third and presumably final year at Notre Dame, it gets cut short in basically the same game, because Kyle Hamilton suffered his injury against USC the first game after the bye week, and then Benjamin Morrison suffers injury, we assume, or reached a breaking point in the first game after the bye week against Stanford. So those are two of the best defensive backs we are going to see in our lifetime, and it's unfortunate that we only got 2.5 years to watch them, and that's just sort of the downside of college football, man, because these guys aren't there long, and when they are there, it's a ton of fun to watch, but things like this happen and gets cut short.
It is part of football, and unfortunately for Notre Dame, it's been a part of football in a very large way this year. And I kind of alluded to this the last time I was on there, like, when does the dam break? Shockingly or not, I still don't think this is the one that does it, but man, it like, can we just relax a little bit with these injuries?
Yeah, are we partially at fault here because we were the ones who are like, usually when this happens, when there's a bunch of injuries at the start of the year, it doesn't just stop. It just keeps coming.
Okay. Yeah, that's not a terrible take. If you want somebody to blame, I will hand up. Put it on me. Not the strength and conditioning coach. I'm sorry. None of you are doctors out there. That's just ridiculousness and frankly reckless to even say that. So blame it on me instead. That's more understandable and less reprehensible than just blaming this on the strength and conditioning coach.
Yeah, I knew this was coming. And I actually thought about this when Notre Dame hired Lauren Landau, because there is that one article that everyone just repurposes about Lauren Landau and the reason that he got fired from the Denver Broncos. And then in that article, they basically say that there were too many hamstring injuries on the roster and they decided to go their separate ways. That does not take into account all the other very famous athletes who are elite and they train, like Christian McCaffrey, guys who are Olympians, guys who are some of the best athletes in the entire world. And they say that Lauren Landau transformed them and basically prepared them to play at their peak. Now, if the injuries were a little bit different,
McCaffrey might not be the best guy to bring up right now.
That's true. What does he have, like Achilles tendonitis? Whatever it's someone, whenever he has injuries that like no one has ever heard of, it's usually not a good sign. But you make a good point there. But I just feel like the injuries that Notre Dame players are suffering, a lot of them feel like freak injuries. Now, it's really hard to say about this Benjamin Morrison one because we just don't know. It's just a hip injury, and that's so vague. I can say that I've had a hip injury before when I was younger in high school, and like obviously nowhere near the athlete Benjamin Morrison is, and it sucked. It affects everything you do, and it does affect your groin, so I can see how those two things are related. But it's really hard to play through because you just can't run full speed and it affects everything. So it's just a really tough break, and I understand why fans are upset. And this is like a really unfortunate run of injuries. This is pretty insane at this point that Notre Dame is only through 6 games on the year, and they have lost, 5 key starters, and then they've lost several other guys for significant portions of the season. But the Batella one, the Traore one, those are non-contact. I just don't think that there's like a cause and effect here that anyone can definitively point to. Maybe he's partially responsible, but to say that he is the sole person responsible, Lauren Lando, for all of these injuries just doesn't make any sense. But I think people are just upset, and I get it because Benjamin Morrison is such a fun player to watch. He's so important to this team. And now it begs the question, how does Notre Dame go from here with their secondary? Because it's been a lead up to this point, and they have some good players, but they're pretty young and inexperienced.
I do think they'll be all right, which is crazy. And I said this, but I think with Christian Gray out there and Leonard Moore and frankly, with Jordan Clark and Rod Hurd's ability to play cornerback, like I think they're going to be all right up there. And Carson Hobbs is probably going to be thrust into action a little bit. So we'll see what that looks like. But the reality of the situation is Vegas's movement seems to indicate Haynes King might not play this week because that Notre Dame line shot from 6.5 to 11.5 real quickly. And frankly, I don't think Haynes King's a very good passer anyways, but he's okay. And then when you look at the rest of the schedule, you got 2 service academies. You got Virginia. Anthony Calandria chucks the ball around, not necessarily in a good way all the time. And then you got whatever the hell's going on at Florida State. So it's not like you're exactly going up against the best passing aerial attacks in the world. And of course, there's Miller Moss in the last game of the season. Nobody knows what he or his team is going to look like Thanksgiving weekend in LA. So I would argue that Notre Dame and Leonard Moore has actually already seen the most prolific passing attack they'll see all year in Tyler Shuck in Louisville. So I think they're in a pretty good position to ride out the rest of this regular season.
Yeah, without Haynes King, Notre Dame should be able to beat Georgia Tech. And yeah, you're right. Haynes King isn't a great passer, but he's just a dynamic player, and they could just do some different stuff. Plus, they have a good line. I don't think that the Benjamin Morrison injury really hurts them against Navy, although I do think that considering that they pass a little bit more now, I think a true freshman player is a little bit more likely to maybe get baited in by the run fake and then leave a guy over the top because he also has never played Navy before. Benjamin Morrison has. He's seen it. He understands what they're going to throw at him. I mean, Florida State, maybe the worst team ever, only rivaled by Purdue, who actually almost got a win this weekend. Did you see that?
They sure did, and I would have loved to see that. And I don't know if you also saw this, but Illinois rushed the field after beating Purdue.
That was real. That was a real thing that happened?
Yes, that occurred.
I saw a tweet that mentioned it. It was like, I thought it was like a sarcastic joke. I did not think.
No.
What was the occasion?
Coming back, I guess, after letting up 46 points in the second half.
You only beat Purdue once?
Yeah, something like that. Yopo or Yopobo, whatever.
Yeah,
Anyways,
exactly.
Yes.
So I think they should be good against Georgia Tech, Navy, although, again, there are some potential hiccups there against Navy. I don't know enough about Virginia, so I'm not prepared to say, but you think that they should be fine going up against them? I know you got some hometown ties to them.
Yeah, I mean, Anthony Calandria is kind of like it's a roller coaster experience. But I don't think that this offense is going to be prepared for Notre Dame's defense. And I think their defense is probably the bigger task other than their offense. And that's really maybe the bigger point here. People don't score on Notre Dame's defense, okay? Like they just don't. And it sounds crazy to say that losing your best player might not change that, but I really don't know that it does.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Leonard Moore will do fine when he's out there going up against the bad teams on Notre Dame's schedule. But I think what it does is it puts Notre Dame in a really precarious spot because now they are truly just one injury away at corner from it becoming a really dire situation. With Mickey gone, with Benjamin Morrison now out for the season, like they still have more and they still have Christian Gray, but Christian Gray already missed a game this season. So I think that they're going to be okay right now, but you don't want Jordan Clark to have to make a move to corner in the middle of the season and then try to figure out your defensive backs on the fly. You don't want Carson Hobbs starting. Like those are things that are now a possibility given this injury. And Notre Dame is in a really tight spot there, really all across the board on defense, except for maybe linebacker. They've managed to stay relatively healthy, knock on wood. Someone's going to get a season-ending injury this weekend. But real quickly on Virginia, if you had to guess, how many receptions and yards do you think Chris Tyree has for the Cavaliers there.
So I actually knew this number a couple weeks ago. It was not a lot. It was less than 10 catches, right?
Well, it's up to 12 catches for 48 yards, no touchdowns. He is currently, sixth on the team in receptions.
Yeah, not quite the weapon that they thought they were getting in him when he came over to Charlottesville.
I know. It's kind of interesting how most of the guys who transfer away from Notre Dame, although Rico Flores has had like a decent year for UCLA, they don't really
They're terrible
work out that much. I remember thinking when Everett Golson transferred to Florida State, I was like, oh, he's going to win the Heisman. He was benched in 6 games. He was benched. Malik Zaire, he made it a few games at Florida. Anyway, let's get back to the point here. So you don't really think the ceiling for Notre Dame has changed at all? Because I guess, what was it, in your opinion, before the Benjamin Morrison injury, and what is it after? Like, is it 11-1 and a win in the playoff? And this is like the best case scenario for this team and for this season.
I think it is that 11-1 win a game in the playoff. It is somewhat matchup dependent, obviously. There aren't a ton of passing attacks that really terrify me in the country. And one of them that would is probably Alabama. But I don't know that a lot of those other schools near the top of the list, like Oregon did some really nice things to Ohio State's defense this past year, but I am just waiting for Dylan Gabriel to mess up like he does every year. So they don't really scare the heck out of me. Yeah, he did. But I think that if you play in that first round, odds are you're probably going to be more talented than the other team across from you outside of Texas. So there's just not a lot of teams that scare me out there.
I thought the best case scenario before the Benjamin Morrison injury was that this team could finish 11-1 and then maybe win a game in the first round, depending on who the matchup is, because you see all these different projections come out right now, and it's really hard to forecast how the season is going to play out. Like, there's just so much football to be played. Like, I'm already seeing some people pencil in Penn State in the college football playoff, and I'm like, let's hold off on that. They got a nice win against USC, sure, but they had to come back. But you get my point. People were penciling Notre Dame into the playoff after week one, and we all saw how that turned out. So I think the way that it changed for me is I still think that this team is capable of making the playoff. The USC game scares me a lot more now just because losing Benjamin Morrison affects Christian Gray. It affects the safeties because I think before, like when you have a guy like Morrison out there, Al Golden can just basically put him on an island and then just basically leave him, and then he can help Christian Gray provide safeties over the top. Notre Dame plays man-to-man more than like 95% of the teams in the country, and I think he has to adjust there, which is going to put a little bit more responsibility on Christian Gray. He might be left on an island a little bit more. So, again, USC game scares me, but they still could go 11-1.
Yeah, so I would agree with that, but when you watch USC this year, even Zachariah Branch, like those guys they have don't really scare you. Like, it's not your typical USC receivers.
That's true.
So I'm not as concerned. And also, like, I just think it's going to get really, really dire in LA. And Notre Dame never really plays well out there. But I think things are going to go extremely poorly the rest of the season for USC. And we might be looking at Lincoln Riley looking for a lifeboat NFL QB coach position.
Yeah, that certainly isn't off the table at this point. They have had some really bad losses. But then again, like, they could be undefeated. So it's really hard to gauge where they're going to be at the end of the season. The fact that they're 3-3 at this point with a win over LSU, like, you're right. If things go south, maybe they just give up and they don't really try in that game. But I think at this point, like, the best thing that they can do this season is essentially play spoiler to their rivals' playoff hopes. So maybe they show up. Either way, that game is trickier now than it was before. With Benjamin Morrison, I don't think Notre Dame loses that game. Now, at least it's a possibility. But for me, I think the biggest change in my projection best case scenario is that I don't think Notre Dame is going to be able to win a game in the playoff. Again, easy to say now because we don't know who the matchups are going to be, but when you consider the teams and the athletes that Notre Dame are going to be going up against, and also, like, I guess I'm just preparing for another injury. Like, I just think it's going to happen. Unfair. So that's how it changes for me. Again, they still should be able to finish 11-1. We'll see if they do, but any aspirations of making a run in the college football playoff, it's really hard for me to see that happening given the way that this team has struggled on offense this year and the way that they leaned on Benjamin Morrison and their defensive game plans. But I don't know, man. Al Golden has figured it out every single week this year, despite the fact that every single game it seems like they lose another starter to a season-ending injury. So if they are able to go 11-1 and win a game in the playoff despite all of these injuries, that would be just an incredible accomplishment for the staff.
It would be, but I just maybe it's silly for us to even do this because why are we trusting this team yet? Anyways, sure. And maybe we should get into actually Stanford now and talk about why we might have some reason to, but I'm still not all the way there yet.
Luke is going to be right back here with me in a second to talk about what we liked and didn't like from the Stanford game, but now it's time for the Roy Player of the Week. The Roy app lets you directly support your favorite athletes. Unlike collectives where you make a donation to a general fund, Roy lets you choose the specific athlete you want to support. You back the players you care about and in return get exclusive content after the season like personal videos and updates. And the best part, it's risk-free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't create the content, you get your money back. This week, I'm choosing Riley Leonard for his performance against Stanford, and I just contributed $100 to his campaign on Roy, and I want you to join me by making a payment of as little as $10. When enough of us contribute, it's not just about the dollars, it's about the message we send to Leonard together. Our collective support helps keep him connected to our school. Plus, Roy is doing their part to bring fans closer to their schools and athletes with an exciting giveaway. Roy is giving one lucky fan 2 tickets to any game of their choice in November. Here's how you enter. Just download Roy in the App Store or Google Play, use code LOCKEDON when signing up, and you're entered. Already on Roy, make a payment to any athlete's campaign, and you'll also be automatically entered. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Go to joinroy.com for official rules. Download Roy and try it out. There's no subscription, no recurring fees, and for as little as $10, you can get in the NIL game. Roy, support the players, change the game. All right, you were there, Stanford, looked like a beautiful day, perfect weather, and then all of a sudden, you're sitting out there for an hour waiting for the weather delay. Did you get flashbacks to South Florida? Did you experience PTSD in any way during that?
No. It was interesting though. I like they kept kind of warning saying, hey, there might be a threat of severe weather. So just be prepared to evacuate if need be. A lot of people left after that touchdown that made it 42-7. So it started to clear out, I noticed. And as an aside, least amount of opposing fans I have ever seen at a game at Notre Dame. There might have been 100 Stanford fans, and that's obviously an exaggeration, but less than 10,000, I would say, for sure. It was just a minuscule pocket in the corner of that end zone they put all the opposing fans in. But I thankfully did not get those flashbacks because the score was 42-7 and not, I think Notre Dame was getting shut out at that point when that game got delayed, right, against South Florida. So thankfully didn't have those flashbacks.
There were so many delays in that game. I don't even remember what the scores were because weren't there were 2 long ones.
There were 2, I think. Yeah.
I can't believe that me and my dad, I think I went with our neighbors too. We stayed till the end of the game. That's a day that we'll never have back.
No, just an absolute waste of it. Yeah, it was 16-0 at halftime. They were losing to South Florida when it got delayed. And then I think 23-7 too. So yeah, not great.
All right, we'll go through these pretty quickly. What did you like on the field on Saturday?
Notre Dame ran RPO successfully for the first time that I can remember in a while. And it looked like an offense that was modern and not just relying on Riley Leonard using his legs out there or running backs making a play. We saw him really make some good decisions on RPO and hit some slants that we haven't seen him make those throws all year. So that was really nice because it's not what we've been accustomed to, not only this season, but really the last couple seasons. Notre Dame shockingly did not run a ton of RPO with Sam Hartman last year after what we saw in the spring leading up to that season. So that was nice to see.
I know. I feel like we have been hearing about Notre Dame running a more RPO style offense for years, and then it just never comes to fruition during the season. And it is kind of odd that they broke this out so late into the year because, we've heard all this talk about how it took some time for Denbrock and Riley Leonard to get on the same page. But it's like, didn't Denbrock want to run RPO? And for the majority of the season, Riley Leonard barely threw after play action. And then he looked really good throwing the ball out of play action in this game, finished 7 of 10, 105 yards and 3 touchdowns. And not only was he putting up good numbers, he looked comfortable. Like that touchdown pass to Jane Thomas was great when he hit Chris Mitchell on the slants. Like all of that stuff looked really good. And that actually leads me to the first thing I liked. And that's the fact that this offense was unrecognizable. Marcus Freeman said it. He's like, I told the guys, I want this to look unrecognizable. And he said that they have seen it in practice, but they have not been able to show it in the game. So it kind of shows you that these guys do hear the outside noise, whether they like to admit it or not, because there have been a lot of complaints about this offense, deservedly so. Coming out of the bye, I thought they were going to mix it up a little bit, break some tendencies. I don't even think I expected this much of a dramatic shift in the philosophy, the tendencies, and just the way that everything looked. But I really, really enjoyed it because it was the first time all season long where you were watching Notre Dame play offense and you're like, not only is this good football, it's entertaining, it's fun to watch, different guys are getting involved. And for the first time in really this entire season, this offense has some real juice to it, and it's about damn time.
Yeah, like we said, we've been waiting on this for years, and I still actually haven't watched Freeman's presser. I feel like I've heard two interpretations of this quote. The first one I heard was that he wanted the offense to look recognizable to the outside world, which is almost funnier to me. Like the fact, like almost saying like it's just been unrecognizable to anybody who knows what football is the last 5 weeks. But this, anyways, in any event, I think that also kind of gives off like he was really unhappy with this offense, and for them to go out there and do that, and just the way Notre Dame played, I think it shows a growing comfortability for Riley Leonard and Mike Denbrock just being on the same page, and that's a really promising thing as we move into the second half of this season, particularly as the defense suffers injuries upon injuries.
It wouldn't be the first time that people heard Marcus Freeman say something in a press conference, or maybe it was an on-field interview, and they were like, what? What was that? It's happened a few too many times this season.
Sure did. But what did happen for the first time on Saturday, and something I want to talk about, is Chris Mitchell had a breakout game. When you look at the stats, it's just 4 catches for 32 yards, but a lot of those catches were in traffic. He had the touchdown, of course, too. And it seemed like there was more of a concerted effort to get him going. And for me, that's a promising thing because we just haven't seen a lot from him through the first 5 weeks of the season. And I think that's important to have another guy in the receiving game that you can get going and you can count on making tough contested catches. So I thought that was really good to see Chris Mitchell in that spot on Saturday.
Yep, he's targeted 5 times, had 4 catches and a touchdown. And the thing is, we had heard so much about Chris Mitchell being a deep threat and how he had all the speed to just go run a fly route and not run the defenders. We have not seen that a whole lot this season, but he also admitted that he needed to become a more polished wide receiver. And I think we saw that going up against Stanford. He had a really nice route on that slant to score that touchdown. Came inside, got leverage against that cornerback, broke inside, made a nice play there for a touchdown. So you're right. Notre Dame really needs him. I was also really happy to see Jane Thomas get a touchdown too because he definitely deserved it. But as Jordan Faison continues to recover from this ankle injury, it provides a great opportunity for Chris Mitchell to really step up because you look at his numbers this year and compare that to what he did at Florida International. Like I think he had more receiving yards in their game against Arkansas last year than he has for the Irish all season long. So if they get him going and then Jaden Greathouse steps up and maybe they get the tight ends a little bit more involved, they might have a legitimate passing threat, dare I say.
Yeah, let's not jinx it, but it's looking more promising. We'll definitely go with that for now.
All right, I want to talk about the defense here for a little bit, and specifically the defensive line, because I think I've been pretty critical of this group. You and I have talked about the lack of production from Howard Cross and Riley Mills a lot, but you and I were texting during the game, and you're like, wow, they are having a terrific game. At different points, it felt like Cross and Mills were unblockable. Like when they're working together, it is such a nightmare for opposing offenses. And then you add in the fact that they got Josh Burnham back and Gabriel Rubio back. Josh Burnham looked awesome. Definitely did not look like a guy who was coming off an injury. So that was really good to see, especially when you consider the fact that Jason Onye missed this game due to personal reasons. I don't expect him to suit up for the Irish anytime soon. So that's another guy down, but finally they are able to add a couple guys, and that is not something they've been able to say a whole lot this season. But now I want to pose the question to you. After all the injuries that Notre Dame has suffered right now, give me your top 5 defensive linemen on this team right now, regardless of position. Just the 5 guys you feel the most comfortable with when they're out there.
I think I would say Cross, Mills, Burnham.
Okay, agree. And then this is where it becomes a real difficult question.
Yeah, I still need to see a little bit more from Gabe Rubio. To be honest, I kind of thought he put on some bad weight. He looked a little bit heavy to me out there the other day. And maybe that's just he still needs to get back into shape, whatever. But I don't know. Junior Tuihalamaka has had a nice year, but would it be fair to put him over even like Donovan Heinisch? I'm not really sure. I think Donovan Heinisch has probably been slightly more productive. And then I guess you got Bryce Young right there, right? Who's coming on. Still like to see a little bit more from him, but that's not really a realistic or fair ask at this point. But it does seem like he's progressing at a high level. And I think Logan Thomas is having a nice year. You'll notice the one name I'm not saying is RJ Oben, because I unfortunately think at this point he looks like a guy that just doesn't have any confidence out there. And I don't anticipate that changing anytime soon.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate too, because I think that he has some talent, but it's to the point now where he's losing reps and he's probably forcing the issue when he's out there. Like, that offsides just cannot happen, especially when it leads to a Benjamin Morrison interception. Like, it just makes matters worse. So I agree with you. The first three are easy: Cross, Mills, Burnham, and then it becomes a really difficult question. I think you could make a case for and against pretty much every other guy. I think Bryce Young is emerging. I'm not ready to put him in that top four just yet. So it's some combination of Gabriel Rubio, Logan Thomas Jr., Tui Alamaka, and RJ Oben. I think I've got to go with Heinisch, though, because even though sometimes he gets blown off the ball and it can be frustrating, like, we have seen him produce enough. Right. So you had Donovan Heinisch in there, and then I think that's when you put in Bryce Young, Gabriel Rubio once he gets fully healthy and back in football shape. And look, like, Gabriel Rubio missed all spring practice, the whole spring semester. Yeah. So, and then he comes back and then he gets hurt. So, like, it's not really a shocker that he's not in football shape, but he still played 21 snaps. So as long as he can get better by the Navy game, because they will need him against Navy going up against that triple option. So Notre Dame has a good defensive line. They've got a lot of young guys emerging here, but their depth is being tested, and it's going to be interesting to see which one of these young guys really steps up. But so far, I would say the early reports on these guys has been pretty damn impressive.
I would agree. Yeah, definitely. And I think also it was good to see Cross and Mills dominate. Hopefully that's a sign that Cross is healthier. We should also point out that they should have dominated, because Stanford's interior offensive line was really banged up and they were awful. The Cross fourth down sack, I wish like somebody got a screen grab of this, because it looks very similar to that Bears like screen grab against the Colts where all the offensive linemen were on the ground. Like, that's what it looked like to me. Like, it looked like all the offensive linemen for Stanford just played dead because they were all on the ground, and Notre Dame's defensive line just walked through basically.
I felt bad for their quarterback Daniels, because when he did get sacked, they were violent sacks. Like the one, I think it was Riley Mills, when he just like ripped his jersey from his shoulder pad down. I was like, man, that can't be a whole lot of fun. So there was a lot of good things, but we do have to address some of the things that we didn't like from this game. What stands out to you?
I got to start with the officials. They were horrible. And it's not just missing calls, which there was plenty of that, but their lack of just accountability and just sense of what's going on out there was so apparent. The amount of conferencing they had to do, no officiating crew should ever have to do that. Like, have some sort of conviction. And it started on the first drive of the game. The fact that Stanford's touchdown wasn't reviewed was egregious, especially
the
when
one time where they needed to review it and come together. They did not do it.
Are all scoring plays not reviewed, by the way? Is that not a thing? Is that just in the NFL?
Oh, I thought they are, but definitely in the NFL.
And the thing about that too is the guy closer to the ball carrier had him down. Some dumbass on the other side of the field was the one that had the touchdown. So that was egregious. And then you had the awful overturned pass interference, which again, okay, just don't throw the flag if you're going to throw the flag, if you're going to pick it up. Like, I don't get it. The Ben Morrison hold was laughably bad. It's just, they were bad all day. And the ACC continues to embarrass itself with the guys it trots out there. And I even like the kickoff where Tiger Bachmeier clearly establishes himself out of bounds. Stanford should have got the ball at the 35, 40-yard line. The fact that doesn't get overturned, like, what are you doing? Just like, it's the lack of competence is shocking.
You also didn't even mention the hold that was called on Anthony Knapp on the nice run by Riley Leonard. Anthony Knapp has had a lot of holds this season. That was not one of them. Should not have been called. It was a rough day for the officials. And
it's a rough day anytime an ACC crew's out there. I don't know what's wrong with them, but Jim Phillips has got to get that figured out.
They just need to do a national governing body, like, why are they still doing it by the conferences at this point? Especially, I mean, there's been so much talk about what's happened with Miami this year and how, like, the ACC refs have been kind of cooking the books for them. Like, you know what would kind of solve all these issues if they weren't working for conferences? If you just had a national body, everyone would be on the same page, and then you wouldn't have to deal with this week to week. I don't think ACC refs are quite at the level of, like, Pac-12 refs in their heyday, but yeah, man, it has been rough. All right, I got a couple things here. They're really nitpicky. One, the lack of touches for Jeremiah Love. I understand that you want to build up Jadarian Price's confidence again, and it worked. He had a good game. He had a nice touchdown run, and I thought it was a good bounce-back game for him after he was benched. But Jeremiah Love is your best player on offense, and at this point, with Benjamin Morrison out, he's one of the top 2 or 3 best players in the entire team. I don't really think that giving him seven total touches in a game is really all that smart. And look, it didn't matter for the outcome of this game, but the conversation about Jeremiah Love, it's like, why isn't he getting more touches? Why isn't he getting the ball more? The fact that we continue to have this conversation week in and week out is a weird trend. And look, in this day and age of, like, transfer portal and guys can leave at any time, maybe you don't neglect your best player. I don't know. I don't think it's something yet, but if they go out there against Georgia Tech and Jeremiah Love doesn't get a touch in the second quarter again, then I'm just going to be thinking, like, why are we overcomplicating this? I understand that Dylan McCullough likes to rotate his backs and give different guys touches in their respective roles, but, like, sometimes football is a simple game. Give the ball to your best player, and they will likely do good things. And when Notre Dame gave the ball to Jeremiah Love in this game, he made great plays. He had that nice play on the screen, the 39-yard touchdown run. Just give him the ball a few more times a game, please.
So I would like to see him have the ball more, but I think something specific to this game that needs to be called out is actually a lot of that RPO that I lauded earlier that Notre Dame was running. That was ran when Jeremiah Love was in the game, and it was Leonard making the correct reads and throwing the ball. So the other thing, the converse of that, is when Price was in the game, they really weren't running much RPO at all. Those seemed to be straight gives just to him, just to run. And I don't know if that's a comfortability with the exchange or whatever it is, but my takeaway on that was that Love was getting opportunities per se, just Leonard was actually making the right way and right decisions and getting the ball out to the other guys. And I thought that screen pass that picked up 25 yards was actually an example of them trying to get the ball to him in new and creative ways. So while I would definitely like him to have the ball more, I do think that partially explains it specific to this game.
Yeah, that's fair. And it is interesting how they utilize Price differently than Love, but I'm going back through it. I really do like what Price can do with the ball in his hands. I just wish he didn't get stuffed so many times. Like, there's just way too many times he gets the ball. Yeah. He likes to break it outside. Once he does, he's gone. He's very shifty, and he's very difficult to bring down. But, yeah, it's a little bit of feast or famine with him.
Yeah, no doubt. Speaking of feast or famine, I would like to talk about the other thing I didn't like, which is the lack of involvement from the tight ends. And this, again, feels really nitpicky. And in fact, the fact that 11 guys caught passes and just one of them was from a tight end should probably be celebrated. But the reality of the situation is I continue to want to see Mitchell Evans more involved in the passing game. They're going to need him in November and beyond. And, I mean, we're halfway through the season, and he's got – how many catches does he have on the year? 4, 5?
Getting research on it right now. I mean, he had some big – you know what's odd, too, is he had big catches early on in the season – which is not what you'd expect considering he's coming off that ACL injury. And
he's got
as
10
the year
catches.
has gone, 10 catches, 101 yards, 1 touchdown.
He has a touchdown?
Oh, no, excuse me. That was Chris Mitchell. Mitchell Evans, 10 catches, 82 yards.
Yeah.
0 touchdowns. He only has 1 touchdown.
In his career.
2 touchdowns in his career because he had the game winner against South Carolina, and then he had 1 last year, so he's only had 2.
Yeah, it's crazy. And there was only 1 target, 2 tight ends on Sunday, and that was the pass to Raritan. So, like I said, like, it kind of feels like we're picking a little bit. And, like, in the past, Notre Dame has been so reliant on getting the ball to tight ends, and maybe this is a nice change. But those guys are weapons. I would like to see them get the ball a little bit more.
Yeah, he played 1 snap less than Eli Raritan in this one. Raritan was out there for 26 plays. Mitchell Evans was out there for 25, 14 of which were pass plays. So the lack of involvement with him is definitely something interesting because I honestly thought this would be like the breakout game where he finally looked healthy. They were feeding him the ball. Maybe they try to force feed him against Georgia Tech in the same way that they tried with Price. But you're right. When you think about the combination of Evans, Raridan, and even Cooper Flanagan was out there despite the fact that he's coming back from an injury, their lack of involvement is just so different than what we're used to with the Notre Dame offense that it's kind of hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, it really is.
All right, the last thing, and we can really wrap it up here because it relates back to the main talking point at the beginning of this, is that we cannot have nice things. Like, of course, Notre Dame's best player goes down just one day after it finally feels like they made a breakthrough, specifically on offense, and you're starting to think like, man, if they put that offense together week in and week out and the defense continues to dominate, like this team might have something, and it just feels like a cursed year. I don't want to say that it's like going to all go bad or anything like that because I genuinely don't believe it, but when I heard about the Benjamin Morrison thing, it was literally right before I started recording the episode last night, and I was like, are you kidding me? Like, here we go again. And it just, I don't know, man. Right when you think that this team is about to turn a corner, and maybe they still will, the fact that this is what we're talking about is just so frustrating, and I just hope it stops sometime soon because this is getting difficult week in and week out.
Yeah, thankfully, I won't be banking that into my projections so that I won't be let down time and time again, but it's brutal, and I feel bad for the kid, and it sucks for fans that don't get to watch him probably again in a Notre Dame uniform.
It is such a bummer, man, because Benjamin Morrison has just been so fun to watch. The only problem is he has become so good that teams were not testing him.
Right.
Like when he got an interception, I was like, awesome, because he never really has the opportunity.
And of course, that was called back. It's an offsides. So can't even have that, which is just, it's a bummer.
All right. Any initial thoughts on Georgia Tech before you're all out here?
Yeah, I said this earlier. It kind of seems like Haynes King maybe isn't going to play. If that's the case, I don't know how viable of an offensive threat Georgia Tech is. But their defense is pretty horrible, by the way, too. But I just want to get through this week and Navy. The Navy game in particular kind of scares the daylights out of me. A nooner at MetLife. Undefeated Navy, while Notre Dame is obviously more talented. Like, that's just, it's a tricky game. So we get through these 2 weeks, no more catastrophic injuries. And maybe, where I'm back. But, man, this is a big one, and it's just like, it's part of the process to earning back some trust. You got to take care of business. Go out there, pound a bad Georgia Tech team again, and then we can start, just believing a little bit more.
All right. We'll see you next Tuesday.
All right. Sounds good.
Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you could start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you could check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And if you're looking for something to bet on with that first $5 bet, I got one for you. So my pick this week, we're looking at Thursday Night Football in the NFL. Saints at home against the Broncos. And guess what? The Saints are underdogs. You're getting 1.5 points at home. So I'm going to take the home dog, the New Orleans Saints. This might not be the most entertaining game in the world. And I know that the Saints really haven't been that hot lately, but I like them to get the win at home. So I'm taking them to cover plus 1.5. And for more, just visit FanDuel.com today. All right, that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about some big recruiting news. Notre Dame actually got a commitment from a quarterback in the class of 2025, and they flipped a commitment from Iowa on the offensive line. So going to address that. Also going to start to shift gears and start looking ahead to the Georgia Tech game coming up this Saturday. As always, remember to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast, and we'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place.